What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Trey for Three. Still trying to figure out which way exactly shouting my name out like that feels and sounds the best. Anyways, I'm back with another video today, and as the title and description state, this one is going to be a review of the Baltimore Ravens' 2022 offseason and preseason, and a preview of the 2022 regular season with some predictions on it and beyond. I figured today was as good as a day as any to get this review out since the regular season does kick off tonight. So with that being said, let's get right into it, starting with a review of the Ravens' offseason moves. I think the best place to start as far as that goes would be with the somewhat surprising firing of former defensive coordinator Don Wink Martindale, whom had overseen the Ravens defense from 2018 up until that point this offseason. Famously known for his aggressive style and tendency for sending blitzes and heavy pressure, sometimes to a fault, as was highlighted last season once injuries really started to ravage that defensive lineup. The firing was a surprise because most onlookers, especially those inside the fandom, not only suspected that it would be the other coordinator, Greg Roman, who would be fired, but they were actually, in fact, advocating for it very openly and very loudly. Yeah, here we are at the start of the 2022 season, and Greg Roman and his offense are still around, while Wink Martindale has taken his talents up the road to New York or New Jersey to assume the same role as the defensive coordinator of the New York Football Giants. In his place, the Ravens turned to someone who was essentially one of their own. Although he was Michigan's defensive coordinator in 2021, that year would be his first and last year working for Jim Harbaugh. However, before that year, Mike McDonald had spent the last 7 years on the staff of Jim's older brother, John, here in Baltimore. So the history report there is obvious, but I do think that a good amount of the credit for his hiring has to be given to the instant success that he had in his 1 year as a defensive coordinator for the Michigan Wolverines, the success he enjoyed, and the way that they wreaked havoc on the Big Ten and teams outside the conference as well. Mind you, he also coached two edge rushers who at the end of last year were both being projected to be first round draft picks. So that's a pretty big deal. And had David Ajabo not torn his Achilles preparing for the draft, that most likely would have happened. But ultimately, things ain't play out that way, and the Ravens were fortunate enough to draft Ajabo in the second round to stop his draft slot after that injury, which was much to the pleasure of Mike McDonald, who he's rejoining here in Baltimore. A month after Mike McDonald was hired, a few position coaches started to be hired, and that part of the staff started to fill out. Most notably among them was probably Zach Orr, who was a former Ravens linebacker and is now the current Ravens inside linebackers coach. Tony Jefferson was also re-signed around that time, though as of now he is no longer on the team, having been released a part of the 53-man roster cuts and then deciding to join Wink Martindale's in New York. Then we get to March, and things got real interesting. Free agency was upon us, but a week before it started, we had some house cleaning to take care of, some things to do. We somewhat controversially released Tavon Young, our veteran slot corner, who I personally liked a lot as a player and as a Raven specifically, even though he dealt with some injuries early in few years of his career. I really felt like a real rebound was coming. Another player that we parted ways with was Alejandro Villanueva, who actually retired at that time. Our failed experiment at tackle, which actually might not have gone so poorly if it wasn't for the fact that Ronnie Stanley was shut down for the final 16 games of the season after playing in the season opener and determining he wasn't near ready to come back at an elite level yet, which personally I respect and appreciate him for in the long run, but man, did that hurt us last year. Villanueva was a complete liability at left tackle after being forced to move there to replace Stanley. The only true bright spot on the offensive line last year, outside of some solid play from Bradley Bozeman at center, who's no longer on the team, would probably come from Kevin Zeitler, our right guard, who put up a very solid and consistent performance in 2021, honestly. Anyways, then we got down to free agency proper. Our first free agent signing of the offseason was Marcus Williams, formerly of the New Orleans Saints, who we signed to a 5-year, $70 million contract. Still a very young guy, 25, and already a proven true free safety. This signing may end up as arguably the best one of the offseason for this team, both in the short term and in the long term. So we'll see how that one goes. Though, of course, signing Williams did spell the end of Deshaun Elliott's time here in Baltimore. A guy that was known as the Joker, Elliott had been with the Ravens since a rookie, battling injuries and a talented secondary year after year as he tried to make his way up the roster. Then once the Earl Thomas experiment ended badly, he was suddenly thrust into the starting role right before the 2020 season kicked off. Personally, I was a fan of Joker, but if Williams is as advertised, and I really can't imagine having any regrets over that one. We also signed the former New York Jet Morgan Moses to help rebuild our talent pool at offensive tackle. With Stanley's availability all up in the air, even now, the week of the kickoff of the regular season, that signing certainly seems like it was a wise one. Morgan Moses has rarely and barely ever been injured in his NFL career up until this point. And you know what they say, the best ability is availability. Another wise move was actually from the season before when the Ravens signed Juwan James, who had been released following an injury suffered working out someplace other than the Broncos' team facility, whom he was a member of at the time. Now seemingly healthy, Juwan James has switched from right tackle to left tackle to back up Ronnie Stanley, and perhaps will be filling in for him for a few games if Stanley isn't ready to go at the start of the season. But for those of you who haven't heard, Ronnie Stanley is back on the practice field, has been removed from PUP, and it's yet to be seen if he'll be ready for week 1 action. But he is at the very least back on the practice field trying to prepare himself for regular season ball. The last of the 3 notable offseason signings was actually a reunion with the former Ravens undrafted free agent Michael Pierce. Pierce made the Ravens roster as an undrafted free agent back in 2016 and quickly became a monster of a run stopper. And after leaving following the 2019 season, opting out in 2020 amid COVID during his first season with the Minnesota Vikings, and then having a fairly solid year last year, Pierce is now back home in Baltimore, open to replace his former teammate, Brandon Big Baby Williams. Some other notable moves were the re-signing through free agency of Calais Campbell, who decided not to retire after thinking it over, and the re-signing of Josh Bynes, who's actually making his 4th stint on the team this year, which is ironic considering the fact that he's currently in line to be the starting Mike linebacker come Sunday's first game, and also finished last season in the same position as our starting Mike linebacker. We also re-signed Project Pat Ricard to a 3-year deal that some weren't sure was going to get done at the time. There's a lot of questions about that one. But he's now the second highest paid fullback in the league behind former Raven and current 49er Kyle Juszczyk. We also put an undrafted free agent tender on Justin Houston, which ultimately resulted in him making his way back to the team this year, which in hindsight was actually a much needed move considering the fact that he's only one of two currently healthy outside linebackers on the active 53-man roster as of the time of recording this video. So definitely, clearly in 2020 hindsight, that was a great signing. We also had our longtime senior VP of operations, Bob Eller, retire, and replacing him was Sashi Brown. For those of you who are into the whole front office side of things, shout out to y'all. And then there was what is likely the peak of the offseason for us, which was the NFL draft and the seemingly embarrassment of riches that we came out of it with. The Ravens ended the 2020 draft with 11 picks, 11 draft picks. That's a lot in a single year for those of y'all who don't know that. One of those picks was a first-round pick that ultimately resulted from a draft night trade of our wide receiver 1, Marquise Hollywood Brown, to the Arizona Cardinals. Hollywood wasn't really happy with the Ravens style of offense or his role in it, even though he finished in the top 10 in targets and top 15 in receptions last year. But not to go on a tangent, not the end or there. Here's the list of the 11 players. The first pick was round 1, pick 14, where the Ravens drafted Notre Dame safety Kyle Hamilton. All hell broke loose after this pick in the media, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Hamilton was almost universally regarded as the top safety in the draft, and many saw it as a surprise that he slipped all the way to number 14 because he was rated in many of their eyes as a top 3 overall player. The second pick in the draft came via that aforementioned Hollywood Brown trade to the Cardinals by way of another trade and a pick swap with the Buffalo Bills. With that pick, the 25th in the first round, the Ravens went with Tyler Linderbaum, the center from the University of Iowa. He's another guy who was widely considered the best player in his draft at the position. Some people even went as far as to call him a once-in-a-generation type of talent at center. So as you can see, first 2 picks, we were off to a pretty good start. We started off hot, Then with our second round pick, we drafted David Ajabo, who's the guy I talked about earlier as having played under Mike McDonald in Michigan. He had 11 sacks last year playing opposite Aiden Hutchinson, who was a top 2 pick, and only just started playing football towards the end of his time in high school. He did tear his Achilles, like I said, preparing for the draft, but he and the Ravens both said that he could be back in action somewhere around mid-season, and we'll see exactly what Mike Mack can do with him with another year under their belt. With pick 76 in the third round, we drafted Travis Jones, the D tackle from UConn. And personally, I had some reservations about it watching this film, considering he played at UConn and barely won any games his entire time there, the level of competition, everything like that. But based on what we saw from him in practice and the regular season prior to hyperextending his knee in week 2, um, he might be as advertised. So I'm actually pretty pleased and pretty surprised, excited to see what exactly we'll get from him when he comes back onto the field. In the fourth round, we had what I believe was a record, tied for a record of 6 picks in the fourth round alone. So more than, almost half of our picks came in the fourth round alone with 6. In that round, we drafted Daniel Falele, whose last name I enjoy saying for whatever reason. He was an offensive tackle from the University of Minnesota. Jalen Armour-Davis, a cornerback from Bama. Charlie Kolar, tight end from Iowa State, who's currently injured and had sports hernia surgery a month or 2 back, and is currently being moved to the injury reserve until he's ready. Another pick was Jordan Stout, the punter from Penn State, which was a big deal. 1, because it's a punter being drafted in the 4th round, but 2, because making the pick made everyone assumed from that point on that he would be replacing Sam Cook, and a few weeks later, he officially did. Side note, Sam Cook is now the special teams assistant coach after being a Raven for life and playing all 16 seasons with him. Another pick was Isaiah Likely in the 4th round, tight end from Coastal Carolina. This is a guy that's been a surprise star in the preseason, and everybody's been hyping him up. So it's going to be curious to see what type of role he'll play in the regular season. And then the last pick of the 4th round was Demarion Pepe Williams, who's a cornerback from the University of Houston, who himself had a pretty solid preseason. And lastly, the last 11th and final pick of the 2022 draft for the Ravens was a 6th-round pick, player by the name of Tyler Beatty, running back from the University of Missouri, who was surprisingly the only one of the Ravens 11's draft picks this year who did not make the 53-man roster. That's a surprise because the Ravens are pretty notorious for not letting go of draft picks, whether that year or usually even guys from the season before. They typically don't just straight up cut draft picks. They may trade them for some capital or something like that, but as far as cutting them, that rarely happens with actual draft picks. All right, now with that out the way, all 11 picks, I have to go back for a second. I want to go back to the first player that the Ravens selected, Kyle Hamilton, and the popular storyline that's been surrounding him. With Hamilton being drafted with the team's first pick and highly touted as a top safety in the draft, along with the Ravens signing Marcus Williams to that 5-year deal, all of a sudden, veteran safety and soul of the defense, Chuck Clark, is looking like the odd man out. But given his experience with the team, his leadership ability, plus how intellectual of a ball player the guy is, it's looking like he might actually be a guy that the Ravens just can't see themselves trading away, just can't afford to lose type of guy. Speaking of, Chuck did admit that once Hamilton was drafted, he did go to the Ravens front office and ask for a trade, which is understandable given the circumstances. I mean, you bring in a highly touted rookie guy, and then you also bring in a star safety in free agency. It's like, where do I fit in type of thing. I get it. But so far, no trade has happened. And I think that honestly has a lot to do with new defensive coordinator Mike Mack and his experience with running three safety sets with Michigan last year. Coupled with the fact that the NFL is becoming more and more pass heavy too. By the way, that's looking in with the way the league is, especially the AFC. I think that the Ravens would greatly benefit from running three safety sets. Considering the fact that the Ravens don't want to reveal their new defensive schemes in the preseason, which again is understandable, it remains to be seen exactly how all of that is going to unfold in the regular season. But I would like to see all three guys on the squad and getting quality minutes. Another of the top storylines was the Ravens' record preseason win streak. The Ravens tied and broke the record, which was held by Vince Lombardi's Packers last preseason, and added three more wins to the count with another undefeated preseason this year in 2022. There was a lot of talk about if the streak even matters, and many, perhaps more casual fans, believe that preseasons in general doesn't even really matter at all. Personally, though it doesn't seem, though it doesn't count towards your record at the end of the season, I think there's a lot of merit in the preseason win streak, especially a record breaker that spans 7 entire preseasons from 2016 to 2022. To me, what it says is that, number one, our backups are better than everyone else's year in and year out, period. Which matters because injuries happen, as we all know, especially with a year like the one we had last year. Even though we finished last year with an 8-9 record, a ridiculous amount of those losses were either decided by 3 points or less or decided in overtime. And like I said, that's with a severely depleted roster. So I think that says a lot about the level of talent that the Ravens feel from week in and week out, year to year. And number two, I just think that it says something about the quality of the players we draft. Not talent wise, more so personality wise. To be able to keep a streak like that alive, it requires, not just your starters and your immediate backups, but your third and fourth stringers and guys who will never play football in the NFL again to work collectively to win and do so consistently. Now that's all I have to say about it. I'm gonna step off my soapbox, but in my opinion, it matters. And lastly, probably the biggest storyline of the offseason, the contract extension of franchise quarterback and former unanimous MVP Lamar Jackson, and when, if, and how it'll happen. As of the time of recording, a deal is yet to be struck, even though Lamar has been vocal in setting a deadline for negotiations of this coming Friday, September 9th. He said that that's the last day that he'll be discussing any type of contract talk. From that point forward, he says that he will be solely focused on the season. So myself and probably millions of others are hoping that a deal gets done in these final hours before that happens. So hopefully this video ends up aging wonderfully and Lamar Jackson ends up being our quarterback for the far foreseeable future. This just seems like a funny little thing that we were worrying about at the time. Rumors are, though, that it seems to be a dispute of guaranteed money. That seems to be the impasse that hasn't been able to be spanned yet. I'm personally of the school of thought that the Ravens shouldn't try and match or exceed the guaranteed money that the Browns offered Deshaun Watson, and I don't think they will. My reason for that being that we learned from the mistakes of giving Joe Flacco that mega contract after the Super Bowl in 2012 that left us with next to no flexibility when it came to retaining a Super Bowl caliber squad around them. Hopefully the Ravens learned from those mistakes of their past, or they're, at the very least, just not at least greatly considering that fact. And not just greatly considering that fact, actually, but also communicating that fact to Lamar. No, I'm not saying that Lamar should have sympathy for billionaires and not ask for and receive what he deserves. But what I am saying is that if he really is as much about winning that Super Bowl for Baltimore like he says he is, he will take that into consideration and allow the Ravens to be able to compete financially while also still getting a top of the market contract. And for the Ravens, they should be working like crazy to make that happen now. Because if you don't and we go and win the Super Bowl this year like we did in 2012, they're going to be forced to pay him more than he's asking for now or let him walk. Or they can try and franchise tag him for back-to-back years and then use that time to either prepare the roster and the organization for life without Lamar, or use those 2 years to allocate as much funds as possible as it takes to giving him that damn contract. In conclusion, pay the man, but don't kill the organization doing it. Balance. That's what it's about. Now, to end the video, I am going to give my record prediction for this 2022 squad, but I'm not going to go super in-depth as why I think they'll beat or lose to every team that they will, because I'll save more of that in-depth analysis for weekly episodes throughout the season, which will allow me to be more accurate and specific when it comes to predicting things, given that I can consider the current state of the team at that time from week to week. I do think Lamar's going to have a crazy year, though. I think Isaiah likely will continue to generate hype, though his season is probably going to ultimately be kind of low, playing behind the best tight end in football in Mark Andrews, and a wide receiver one who's looking to prove himself in Rashad Bateman, all within a run-heavy offense. So that's going to be interesting, but I do think that we're going to see quite a bit of Isaiah likely, and it's going to be, I think we're going to like what we see. He'll impress, in my opinion. I think the defense will finish as the best in the NFL. Actually, I think they'll be the number one ranked defense in the NFL. I think our turnover differential will be top 3. I think Bateman and Andrews will both surpass 1,000 yards receiving, and J.K. Dobbins passes it on the ground. All right, so those are my statistical type of predictions. Now for the schedule itself. Looking at the schedule and starting from the top, the Ravens will win week 1 at the Jets to start the season. That's this coming Sunday, 9/11 in New York, big deal. Or in New Jersey, but big deal. Then they'll win week 2 in a potentially great game against Miami in their home opener. I'm curious to see how that one will go. I think they win week 3 against a Patriots squad that's trying to find itself offensively. Statement win week 4 at home against the AFC favorite and Super Bowl favorite Buffalo Bills. Then, first loss, unfortunately, comes at home in a primetime Sunday night football game against the Cincinnati Bengals. A bounce-back win against a struggling Giants team, probably ready to give up on Daniel Jones by that point. Another one that will win to a struggling Browns team, though it'll probably be closer than it should be. A tough loss against Tampa Tom, the GOAT, and the Bucks. A win against the Saints on the road makes another statement. Upset loss the following week against the Panthers at home with Baker Mayfield at quarterback facing a familiar foe. I think that'll be a tough loss. Another road win will come the following week playing against the Jacksonville Jags. A win at home against Russ and the Broncos. Our defense might be his kryptonite, in my opinion. Ravens will win the following week, but it's close. And I think it's close because they'll be playing Kenny Pickett. And the Ravens defense is notoriously struggles at times with surprise starts of rookie quarterbacks. This next one's going to be a toss-up. I think it depends on how well and how quickly Deshaun Watson gets reacclimated to pro football life. But I'm going to give it to my boys in a close one. Ravens win. Then we have a win at home against the Falcons, another win to sweep the Steelers, and then the final week of the season, week 18, I believe that we will lose against the Cincinnati Bengals in a game where we rest the majority of our starters. That would mean that we go 13-4. So barring injury or any failure to return to injury for guys like J.K. Dobbins, who's been activated off PUP, Ronnie Stanley, who I also mentioned was activated off PUP, Marlon Humphrey coming back from the shoulder injury, Marcus Peters from his ACL, Lamar Jackson from the ankle. Barring all those people being able to return fully well with very little setbacks, I do not see the Ravens winning less than 11 games. But optimistically, I'm going with 13-4. I'm on the record saying it. Stamp it. There it is. You heard it here. Ravens 2022 going 13-4 in my opinion. And then, since the Rams and the Bills are about to kick off tonight, I'm going to go ahead and predict that Bills game prior to my live stream tomorrow. I predict that the Bills will win that game by 10 points, and it's going to be a very defensive game that will come down to a couple costly turnovers. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. I appreciate everybody for checking me out here. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well as comment to let me know what you think. Give your predictions on your favorite team, commentary on what I just said, the topics that were discussed, and also what you'd like to see from the channel going forward. Don't forget, you can become a patron of mine through Patreon. You can find me on there at Trey for 3. You can also find me on Instagram at the same name, Trey for 3. Follow me there, follow me here. I appreciate all the love, and I'll see you guys next time. Trey for 3.